Good evening and welcome to the October 8th, 2024 Park and Recreation Special Hybrid Video Meeting. The time is now 5 p.m. My name is Peter Struck, Park and Recreation Commission Chair. Tonight's Park and Recreation Commission meeting is in person and using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. Other public audience members that are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Additionally, the city has opened up the community center to provide public space for viewing and participating in the meeting. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please turn on your microphones and will the city staff please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Markson,
Present.
Commissioner Westberg, Commissioner Hay,
Here.
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner McCarthy, Vice Chair Burstein,
Here.
Chair Struck.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
City staff, is there anyone who has signed up for appearances that wishes to address the commission this evening?
Yes, Chair, we have one public appearance this evening.
Thank you. Individuals wishing to speak live during the appearances portion of our meeting may do so by telephone, via Zoom, or in person at Mercer Island Community and Event Center. Provided, however, they register their desire to speak with the city admin staff by 4 p.m. today. Our city admin staff will call on you by name or telephone number when it is your turn to speak. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the Park and Recreation Commission. All remarks will be addressed to the commission as a whole and not to individual commission or staff members. If any person makes personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks, or who becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the commission, I may request that that person leave the meeting. When it is your turn to address the commission, be sure to speak audibly and state your name for the record. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Staff will provide you with a 10-second notice when your time is about to expire. Once your time has expired, I will thank you for your comments and move to the next speaker or first item of business. City staff, please admit the first speaker.
Chair, thank you, Chair. Sue Stewart.
Yes, good evening. I'm Sue Stewart. I've lived on the island for 50 years. Thank you for serving as Parks Commissioners. First, the comp plan, which I looked at, looks good. Luther Burbank Park, Upper Luther, and Pioneer Park are no longer zoned as residential. Clarifying open space parks is really significant. So good work. I'll be watching that as you progress. Tonight, I'm here as a pea patch gardener of 17 years, urging the grandfathering of pea patches to a few of us very long-time gardeners. We have shared our names and email addresses in a petition, both to the park staff and to you by email prior to this meeting. We realize it is technically this body, our parks commissioners, that set the rules of 1 patch per renter effective next year, 2025. We're asking that you make the new 2025 rules prospective rules for future renters and not retroactive, which will require evictions for about 10 of us old timers. We're not young, and there is a natural attrition rate already. We unfortunately lost Storm Yannix to cancer and helped her family cull plants last winter to share with her family from her 2 patches. Petitioners have tended our spaces for a decade or more. My neighbor for 40 years. She nurtures perennials and a grape arbor. It's deeply rooted and beautiful. We hope that just a 1-sentence amendment to the current document is all that is needed. We call it grandfathering. Perhaps there's a better term. Since no new plots were rented this year due to the water line break, at least a dozen full-size plots sit vacant, and 7 plots sat vacant all of 2023 with no takers. from the waiting list. So 2 summers ago had vacancies. There are clear opportunities for new renters without evictions. The park staff has set the first meeting for November 18th with notice to all of us that no grandfathering will be allowed. We got their message. We understand. That is how it is written right now. But we had hoped to stay, and right now, our hope rests with you. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further
No,
appearances.
no further public appearances, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first item of business, and that is the staff liaison report and planning schedule update. And for that, we welcome Recreation Manager Ryan Daly.
Thank you, Chair. Let's see, and it's showing, perfect. Quick department liaison report again, Ryan Daly, Recreation Manager. If I can click through. There we go. A couple project updates. I believe the commission received an email last week on the process for public input toward Clark and Groveland beaches. The city's launched a digital survey to collect information on how the community is utilizing these spaces. Responses will be available and accepted through October 22nd. Community input will be combined with other background analysis to inform the scope of planning process for future improvements for these park spaces. And staff anticipate engaging the Parks and Recreation Commission for input in December and bringing a recommended planning scope to the City Council in early 2025. Information is available on the Let's Talk page down there at the bottom. Luther Burbank Boiler Building. I think most of you share my excitement in this facility. Work continues on that project. Installation of the mezzanine and the stairway railings is underway. Some parts needed to be modified, so the completion may be delayed a couple of weeks. The roll-up door for the concession stand and the water heaters for the restrooms have been installed. The chimney cap fabrication is complete, and it should be delivered and installed soon. Substantial completion on this project is expected in about 2 short weeks. Very exciting to get this new facility up and available for the public to see and utilize. Pickleball courts, another exciting project. Last week, Northwest Asphalt placed the second list of asphalt pavement, and the team conducted a flood test down to check out the planarity of the courts and the drainage. You can kind of see that picture down there at the bottom right. Drainage performed as planned, and the team found a few ridges, which is pretty common in court paving. Those will be addressed as the acrylic surfacing is laid down, so it won't have those waves. So we were expecting that. Next up, Field Turf will be completing other items, including installing the new drains, building the new access path, and grading the south hillside. Staff anticipate that these courts are going to be playable later this month with some temporary striping. The final playing surface and markings will be installed next spring, and we're already planning that ribbon cutting for 2025. So stand by, invites will be coming your way. To stay updated on the project, the link is below. Some good news, family movie night fun. We had 124 people register for last Friday's movie night. For Kung Fu Panda 4. Families brought blankets, chairs, enjoyed popcorn. What we find with these events, which is pretty fun, and we set the community center up this way, is not all kids are great at staying and sitting quietly and watching a movie. So we do open up a large portion of the upstairs of the facility so kids and parents alike can get out and about. Thank you to Mercer Island Martial Arts for sponsoring this event. They've been a great sponsor and will continue to be as we go forward. Our next movie night is scheduled for Friday, December 13th, and that's actually going to be part of what we're calling our holiday family party, which we'll be providing some more information on later this month. Staff is currently and maybe aggressively arguing about what our next movie is going to be. So if anybody has any input, please feel free to send it to miparks@mercerisland.gov. And that'll help sway the selection, probably in my direction would be my guess. Mid-Autumn Festival, I'll start with the second bullet. Wow. We had a huge turnout here at the community center on September 22nd. A number of vendors. It was community organized, partnering with the Parks and Recreation Division or department. Went really well. It included lanterns, delicious mooncakes, a bunch of different performances, and a variety of games and activity for the families. This facility was packed. Great to see. Little challenging parking wise and some impacts on the neighbors. Shout out to our police department who jumped up and assisted with traffic and helping address some of the parking issues. We're already working with with our partners to permit and address that in a better fashion for future events. But all in all, good problem to have and something we can definitely solve. Another thing I'm really excited about, this is great news. This last week, the Recreation Division started offering what we're calling our Winter Web Special. That's for booking our athletic fields at a discounted rate. We're doing this as a pilot program. It's all online. This is completely different than anything we've done before, but it allows field users to view our synthetic turf inventory, go in and book their time slots that they desire, and pay online with no staff interaction. Our past processes, very, very staff heavy. It's still going to be that way as we address priority booking, but once we move past that priority period, we're able to offer these online opportunities, which is just great for the users as well as us. We had 16 bookings in that first week that we opened it up. That's 40.5 hours that were completed by 4 different organizations. Those were bookings that I would say weren't going to take place had we not offered this opportunity. So working very well. We're going to continue this through the month of November, and it'll be reintroduced in December following that priority booking for Mercer Island residents. I will be returning in 2025 sometime to review this process and provide any recommendations for policy enhancements that we might need to make to that athletic allocation and use policy. So more to come on that, but tremendous pilot program that we've started trying out, and with tight staff resources, this is one of those areas that helps us provide a little more bang for the buck. So excellent opportunity. Upcoming programs, we have an Arbor Day event scheduled for October 19th from 10 to 2 o'clock. That will be at Gallagher Hill Open Space, and you can scan that QR code, or there's the registration link down below if you're interested in participating. Sticking with the planting, and our public comment mentioned this, the Pea Patch Community Garden, we've begun work as staff to prepare for 2025. A big part of that has been connecting with our participants and identifying their current plot locations. I'll highlight that our maps in the past have not been great on what the dimensions of plots are and where they're established. So we're updating all of those in conjunction with the participants. And then we're also working toward not just working with the current participants, but those wait list and prospective participants. So getting them in lined up for the registration process and expectations of the program so that they're well aware. We will be hosting on November 13th at 4 o'clock here at the community center a informational meeting for the Pea Patch program. That's geared toward both those current and prospective users so that they can meet the staff, inform on the application and registration process, discuss program participation and maintenance expectations. So not just what maybe our expectations are from program participants, but also what they should expect from city staff up in that area. And then we also have the opportunity to provide any answers to any questions that those program participants might have. Again, that's on November 13th. There's a link to the Pea Patch program down there at the bottom if you want to review the rules or the program objectives. But I would like to invite the Parks and Rec Commission to sit in on that meeting. If you do plan on attending, please let me know in case we need to notice that as a public meeting. We got a couple new recreation programs as well. One in partnership with MyVol, that's Urban Sketching Mercer Island, and that'll take place on October 19th. More information is on that slide, and you can scan the QR code. And then also we've introduced a new Friday ballet program. So we're trying to get back to some of those programs that were previously offered before COVID. This was one of them, a great partnership. They're going to be coming in and running this select set of dates, and information is on the bottom of that slide to register for ballet. Halloween weekend, one of our favorite times of the year here at the Recreation Division. Town Center trick-or-treating will take place on Friday, October 25th from 4 to 6 o'clock in Town Center. We will have pumpkin decals on businesses that are participating in that. We're also working in a couple of locations to provide additional opportunities for other businesses, maybe outside of Town Center, to be able to participate in this activity, as well as other city departments also. So that'll be an excellent opportunity there on Friday, October 25th. Sticking with that busy weekend, on Sunday, October 27th is the pumpkin walk. We need pumpkins. You may have noticed as you came into the community center, we have a bunch outside for people to pick up, carve, and return to be placed at the event. So we are encouraging people to take part in that. But that is a large draw community event that goes very well every year. Touching base on the planning schedule, I'm wrapping up the year here on November 7th. We'll be focused on the park zone planning and also recreation policy implementation update. That'll be a quick review of the policies we've enacted over the last 2 years. I'll give a bit of an update on how the outcomes are progressing with that and if I anticipate bringing any of those policies back for update later in 2025. And then on December 5th, we'll continue our park zone planning work. We'll have an introduction to the Groveland and Clark Beach planning. And then I'm going to be moving the parks and capital projects and levy update later into 2025 after it goes to the city council. There will be a similar presentation that goes to the city council, and then we'll drill down a little bit more specifically on parks later on in 2025. With that, any questions? And thank you. I thought I saw a hand pop. Oh.
Oh, Commissioner Cohen has his hand up.
Yes, Don Cohen. Thanks, Ryan. I had 2 questions and 1 comment about some of the items that you reported on. First of all, what is planarity as it relates to the pickleball courts? That's a new word for me.
Excellent question. Let's say flatness. Fairly accurate, Sam? Yes, yeah, it'd be the flatness of the courts. It's a tough word though to say.
Okay, thank you. My comment is that I guess I was a little surprised that the Parks and Rec Commission hadn't been given an opportunity to weigh in on some of the survey questions, given the amount of input we had put into surveys for the pros plan, et cetera, in the past. So I don't intend to open up that for discussion, but I just wanted to make a comment that I was surprised that we were not part of that process. My second question is on the P-patch issue, and particularly Sue Stewart's comment. If the Parks and Rec Commission were inclined to be interested in revisiting the question that she raised, and I don't know whether they would be or not, but if they were, is that something that could be done under our board rules and our commission rules and otherwise? And if so, how would you do that? And if that's not something that you care to answer tonight in this context, that's fine. But I was interested in those questions relating to those comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll briefly answer how things get added to the Parks and Recreation Commission agenda. What I would do is I would work with the chair and vice chair to determine if that is an item to put forward onto a future agenda and when that fits and whether or not that might be necessary. I see the city managers popped on as well.
I was just going to add, I want to clarify too, the operating policies are stewarded by the staff. It doesn't mean there isn't a space for advisory boards to share your advisory thoughts. So I'm sure Ryan is open to receiving them. One thing I did want to mention, I'll play Parks Director for a minute. I think we haven't been actively advertising the availability of the P patch because we've had a waiting list. And so I don't want you to take away that there's no demand. It hasn't been a program we've actively marketed recently because there's been no space. So part of what we're trying to get back to is making space available for as many people as possible. We only have one P patch. I just thought that would be worth clarifying. But Ryan can work with the chair if the PRC would like to provide their advisory thoughts on that matter.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Just a quick question about the online field reservation. You mentioned it saying it was happening before the priority reservation process kicked in. Does that mean people got to kind of jump the queue and get in when they otherwise wouldn't have been able to by doing it this way?
Excellent question. No. So the way it works is we do, I believe, 3 seasons right now of reservations. So you have priority booking at the beginning of each of those. November is the last month of that booking period. So all of the priority booking all took place ahead of summer. So people got their bookings in. We identified the open times that were available and then opened that up to everyone.
So you were just kind of filling in spots that weren't taken in the last priority booking session.
Exactly.
Okay,
And
good.
and then our new priority booking period, we have a December through February. So we will be taking those priority bookings in right now. Then after November, we'll open that up again for those vacant spaces for people to then backfill in as needed. Which this process works really good when individuals cancel bookings and then want to book later at a different time. It gives them a lot more flexibility than having to go back and forth with city staff to get those bookings placed. So the residents still, and all others who fall into that priority category, still receive that benefit.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hay.
I have similar comments as Commissioner Cohen. I think it would be nice to revisit the P-patch rules that we looked at previously. As we heard tonight, sometimes there are either unintended consequences or things that we didn't consider in that process. And so it might be nice to just take a look at that again, if the commission and staff are willing and interested in that. And maybe looking also at how many vacancies do we have? What does our waiting list look like? Just having a little bit more data to look at. And then also the 10 plots that were mentioned that are hoping to be grandfathered in. What is the state of those plots? Do they have mature plants? Are they being tended? Are they not? Just a little bit more data might help us make a decision.
I do want to highlight for the commission, these are operational aspects and how we implement the program. I'm happy to work with the leadership to bring those rules back for review. But this is the operational side of the program, and I want to make sure that we just stick along that track. We haven't actually implemented any of these rules yet. But I'm happy to return at the November meeting and provide a bit more of an update on where we are with implementing these rules, as well as all of the other policies for Parks and Recreation. And if desired, and I'm happy to work with the chair and vice chair to set another meeting and discuss them further if that's desired. So best input would be at the following November meeting.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I think to address, I think just to add, just having more kind of a comprehensive view of kind of what the situation is today in terms of just the data, like Ashley suggests, I think might be helpful in terms of kind of clearing up some of the questions some in the community may have and so forth. So I think that's a good idea. But yeah, you're right, we can talk about this. Okay. Any other comments for the staff? Oh, Commissioner Cohen again.
Yeah, well, yeah, Don Cohen, one follow-up comment. I mean, I went back and looked at portions of the October discussion of the P-patch issue and the motion. And as I recall, the motion was I had to leave that meeting a little early, but the motion was to endorse the rules or whatever they're called. So I'm a little uncertain about what is policy and what is operational, but maybe that will come out a little more clearly if we wind up talking about this further. And it sounds like that'll be, well, no, that wouldn't be after in the meeting that you're going to have, Ryan, I don't think. I think your meeting's what, on the 13th, and if we were going to talk about this at the November meeting, our meeting would be before that. But in any event, I'm not very clear at the moment on the impact of Ryan's comment and the city manager's comment about operational / staff versus policy / commission, particularly when the commission is being proposed to endorse something that is a specific policy. I didn't consider that the adoption of that particular rule something that was operational, the implementation of it for sure, but not which way the city wanted to go on it. Just a comment.
City manager has a comment.
Yeah, if it's helpful, I'll just maybe try to thread the needle a little bit. I think that Ryan and team have historically, when opportunities presented themselves to share policies with all of you and get your feedback. The reason the word endorse was used is that the Parks and Rec Commission does not set policy. The council sets policy, citywide policy, and the staff have the authority delegated to set operational policy. But as a courtesy, the policies, many of them come to you just for your feedback and review. It's a nuance. I just wanted to clarify. It sounds like I just messaged Ryan and said I'd be happy to support him at the November meeting, since I think I'll be here again, and we can follow up and review what's happening with the community garden at that meeting. It sounds like there's interest, so we'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Any other
Thank you.
comments? All right. We'll move on to the second item on the agenda, which is to review and consider approving the minutes from the September 5th, 2024 regular meeting. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Hay. And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Markson. So there's been a motion by Commissioner Hay and a second by Commissioner Markson. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on the minutes before we vote? Seeing none, please turn on your microphones, and will the city staff please conduct a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Burstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Westberg, Commissioner Markson,
Aye.
Chair Struck,
Aye.
Commissioner Cohen,
Aye.
Commissioner McCarthy, Commissioner Hay.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair.
So the motion passes and the minutes are approved. Thank you. We now turn to the third item on the agenda, which is the Park Zone Development discussion. And for that, we welcome City Manager Jesse Bond.
Here we are again, zoning discussions. Yay. Hey, before we dive in, I just want to acknowledge the great work all of you did in the earlier part of the year on the open space zone. That was a really tremendous lift, and it is headed to the council on Tuesday for our first reading. And if it will go to a second reading, and then everything comes together at the very end of the year with both the comp plan and that code being adopted, and then they take effect January 1. So we're on to part 2. I have a really brief slide deck. Most of tonight is going to be inviting you to participate and brainstorm and start to develop the part 2 here, the park zone. So I think Carson is driving my deck for me. All right, let's go to the next slide. Tonight, I have just a handful of comments, introduction and background. I think this is all probably still pretty fresh in your minds. I'll remind you about the zoning code framework. We're hoping to dive in and again, do some brainstorming tonight. We brought out our trusty flip charts to talk purpose statement. designated requirements and uses permitted. Most of our time tonight will be asking you to think about the types of uses permitted in our parks zone. We'll take a look at the timeline and then we'll take your feedback and we'll be back in November and actually have some draft text for you to start looking at. Let me turn off this there we go. All right, next slide. Again, this is really fresh in your mind. I'll just remind you, we started this work thinking that we were going to have, one comprehensive zone spring of last year. That didn't quite come together the way we had anticipated, so we split the work. We adopted an open space. Well, we're in the process of adopting a new open space zone, and the park zone is part 2. Next slide, please. I think I just said all of this. Actually, I do want to mention, so our work on the park zone will roll into 2025. One of the funny rules with the state of Washington is we can only amend our comprehensive plan once a year unless there's an emergency. Because a zoning change requires both a code amendment and a comp plan amendment, we're basically trying to get this work done in the early part of 2025 so that when the council does their one-time comprehensive plan amendment at the end of 2025, this new zone will be incorporated. Probably more than you wanted to know, but I just wanted to set your expectations that even if we get our work done in early 2025, it won't be implemented until like January 1, 2026 likely. But we still have to stay on schedule to get there. All right, next slide. I seem to be jumping ahead of myself consistently here. New zones require development regulations. That's what we're going to start working on tonight, an amendment to our zoning map. And then the land use designation and the comprehensive plan has to be amended. So all 3 of those things come together at the same time to effectively introduce a new zone. Next slide. Your work is the beginning. We're on the front side of the development of this zone. The steps, require another commission similar to last time. So you'll be handing off a recommendation to the Planning Commission. They will do, we anticipate sometime in the spring, a formal legislative review, probably take us up to the summer, and then they hand it off to the council. So multiple baton passes along the way, exactly like the open space zone, although not quite as rushed, hopefully. Okay, next slide. This is my opportunity just to remind you, we have an umbrella document, an umbrella policy document that informs much of what we do with parks, recreation, and open space. That's your PROS plan that was adopted in 2022. So as we work through our zone, I'll do my best to remind you of the policy guidance that plan provides. There's a whole bunch of other plans kind of underneath this umbrella that we'll reference if we need. But specifically, if you want to dust off that plan, the next slide, please. Chapter 4 is where I will always point you back to. That's where we have 8 goals. And underneath each of those 8 goals is a series of objectives that we worked on pretty intensely that guide the operation of our parks and recreation system. So again, if we need to pull that up as we're working, we will do so, similar to what we did with the open space zone. Okay, next slide. So diving into the discussion, I promised we would get through these slides quickly. I had a chance to meet with the chair and vice chair last week, and it's taken us a while to get our arms around the park zone approach. What I tend to do, and I know it was kind of a stumbling block for us earlier, is we immediately go to what's actually happening in the park system and all the reasons that we can't write a code, right? Our park system is super unique. We have buildings, shorelines, impervious surface, pervious surface. So we think the best approach is to advise you to write your preferred park zone, right? Let's start with a clean slate. I think it's important to be mindful of what's in our park system, but to write the park zone that you would want. At the end of the process, somewhere probably around December, January, we'll take the text that we've drafted and we'll do a test fit. So we'll look at our draft zone and we'll look at our park system and we'll just test fit the zone onto our existing properties and we'll see what problems we have. the problems in zoning language, probably some non-conforming uses, right? So if your park zone says we only allow buildings of a certain size and we do the test fit, I think we all know at Luther Burbank, we have a very sizable administrative building. So that use may not fit in our zone, but we'll figure out then what to do about it. I don't want that to be a barrier right now. I think we'll just start tripping over our feet right away if we go to how this doesn't work instead of how you want it to work. So I'm going to ask you to, as we begin our brainstorming, let's get your vision out on the table. What does this zone look like to you? And we'll deal with the problems down the road and decide how we'll address those. And some of that I think will be up to the city council to help us navigate. I'll call them right now zoning conflicts. So we're just about ready to dive in. Next slide, please. You remember from the open space zone. In fact, we put on the dais, and I think Commissioner Cohen, you have the link at home, the open space zone, just to remind you of the 5 categories. Tonight, we wanted to do some brainstorming around the purpose statement. We can take a look at the open space zone purpose statement for reference. How might the purpose statement for the park zone differ? Designation requirements. This is a pretty technical section of a zoning code. It just says, how do we know if a land should be zoned as park zone? Or I think we're going to spend most of our time tonight is actually on uses permitted. And I hope this will be a little bit fun for us. We can think of all the ways and things that should be allowed to happen in our park zone, and probably think about some things that we don't want to have happen. I don't want you to worry about writing zoning code language tonight. We're going to take all this feedback and we're going to take a stab at it. When we see you in November, our deliverable will be having item 1, 2, and 3 drafted for you based on your feedback tonight. And then actually, Carson, if you'll go back one slide, for the November meeting, get your coffee, your pizza, your leftover Halloween candy. That's going to be a tense meeting. We'll start talking about the development standards. So you remember how we baked this cake last time? The uses permitted are then informed by those development regulations, and that's where things get real complicated. I think item number 4 is going to take us 2 meetings. So probably November and December to work through development standards, maybe spilling into January. Definitions are kind of the sweep up action at the end. Once we've got most of our text laid out, we go back, we look at our code and see where we've already got definitions and where we might need some new ones. So that's how the work will lay out. We're hoping to hand this off to the Planning Commission. I jumped slides again, sorry, Carson. In the spring, February, March, April, there's some flexibility there. There we go. I put all this in your staff report. At the end of the deck, we sent it out ahead of time. We put together a photo tour. All of you have recently been on a tour with our staff, and I know you're all active users of our parks, so you have good familiarity with what's out there. Those photos were just, to remind you, especially as we dive into the uses permitted discussion. So with that, I think that is my last slide, and we don't want to hear me talking all night. So Chair, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll start at the top. All my staff here are telling me they have terrible penmanship, so I'm going to get up and maybe write some notes. We have 2 flip charts. I'm going to keep track of parking lot items, maybe questions and issues we can't answer or address tonight, but we'll, just like last time, we'll make sure we record them for follow-up. And then we'll start jotting some notes down about the purpose statement.
Okay, thank you. So as the city manager suggested, again, tonight's not the time to kind of think about wordsmithing or getting into a lot of minutiae, but really kind of, at a big picture level, what do we want these things to look like? The thought I had is if you looked at the Mercer Island Park system and said, all it is just raw land, some of it's by water, some of it's interior, but there's nothing on them. That's kind of what we're saying. Well, what should be on them? And not worry about what's specifically on them today. And we're looking to kind of look at purpose, park zone designation requirements, then uses permitted. And I think maybe we'll just take them, one at a time here. I think it's helpful to look at the open space zone. language just that we developed a few months ago or several months ago to, again, kind of get you in that mindset. So with that, in terms of the purpose of a park zone, anybody have any thoughts that they want to share? Going once, twice.
Mr. Chair, I might just share real quick.
Okay.
No. Operator. This is out of the pros plan. Which I think I'm in chapter 1, the introduction, just to get you thinking. I can't remember where all these words came from, but we developed them as a
Yeah.
commission. So if this sparks any ideas for words that might make up a
Yeah.
purpose statement.
And while you're looking at that on the screen, I'll just throw out some thoughts I had. And I kind of drafted here, I said, the purpose of a park zone is to improve the overall quality of life for the community. And then I said, and how do you do that? Well, by offering spaces for physical activity, social gatherings, and cultural activities. And then in addition, parks can generate positive environmental and economic benefits. So those are some ideas.
Mr. Chair, will you also, at the conclusion of the meeting, email us with that?
Sure, yeah.
I'm 100% certain my associate here did not get all that down.
No. But as I thought about it, I mean, you know, if I think of the parks, it's really to try to improve the overall quality of life here. And then, well, how do you do that? You know, physical activity. And so there's, you know, probably some better words than that, but and even what's kind of up on the screen too, you could probably incorporate some of that.
Other words or phrases come to mind?
Oh, sorry. Vice Chair Rursty.
So I think we also have to recognize the complexity of these parks, that they include developed and undeveloped land. We're not going to segregate the two within the park zone as much as recognize they both exist.
Don, we can't see your hand on the screen, so if you have thoughts, just kind of jump in.
Oh, okay. Thanks. This is Don Cohn. I had a couple prompted by your comments, Peter. You had, I thought yours was good. You had something in there about physical activity. I think maybe something a little broader, like recreation, because somebody might, even though it's the park zone and not the open space zone, somebody might just want to be strolling through it, or parts of it. And I know you had social interaction or something like that also, which was fine. But I'm thinking about is playing chess physical activity? I don't know. So I would be either a little more inclusive or a little broader on those kinds of things. And I agree with what Paul said about at least some recognition of the two basic different types of uses.
Commissioner Hay.
I think there's a nice sentiment captured on that previous slide from the pros plan.
Go back,
And it
sorry.
would be nice to include elements of that in the purpose statement, similar to what Dawn said about health and, right, so something about the purpose of the parks zone being, sorry, this is going in and out. Okay, right. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
okay. The purpose being to promote recreation, healthy activities, environmental conservation, fiscal responsibility, in order to preserve our parks as a thriving, livable part of Mercer Island. So just turning that sentiment into part of the purpose statement. I think chess would be captured in there. a healthy activity.
Sorry, my audio wasn't on to laugh at that comment. Chuckle, not laugh, but.
Other thoughts, suggestions?
This Don again, Peter. I mean, I think that, not to cut off this discussion, but I think between what the city manager put up there and what you crafted in the comments here, you've got a lot of the key words, and I personally wouldn't spend a lot of time figuring out specifically which word is best at this point, because I think from my point of view, you got it.
Thank you. Councilmember Reynolds?
Yeah, you went through yours kind of fast, so I may have missed some things that you said, but one that looks like it's missing up there is arts and cultural activities. And what about possibly educational opportunities as well?
Sorry, my screen is moving. I wanted to, Councilmember just reminded me, we've got in the pros plan, the city's values, which the city council hasn't updated in a while, but the framework is still very relevant to, and that the word education reminded me of that. I think most of this is already captured in our note taking here.
All right. Commissioner Marks?
Yeah, and maybe this goes along with the education idea or that Councilmember Reynolds just described, but I was thinking community gathering, or maybe just more a generic word, but something related to community gathering. And then just looking at the open space one, I guess maybe I'm having an easier time picturing words I would take out and that and leave in from this zone, but I think that the stormwater management and carbon sequestration could be in the, maybe not, well, I don't know, but arguably they could both be in the park zone as well. And in fact, the whole last sentence, maybe removing the word passive from the last sentence, which reads, open space lands provide access to nature for recreation and relaxation. And maybe nature part would have to be removed, but, or modified, because I know this zone would have more development for recreational purposes, but that's still theoretically nature.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, those are good comments. I think we've probably given staff plenty of thoughts there to kind of do their magic and come up with something that makes sense, and we can see it again next time. So with that, I'd like to move on to the park zone designation requirements. And if I could just jump in, again, I just look at the current open space, and I guess I would ask staff, if you think about a park zone, is there really anything different that you would add or subtract from what was in the open space, other than just the name change? When I looked at it, I didn't really see anything, but I might be missing something.
I think what we've done here is going to work for the park zone. The reason that we had the words leased or managed in the open space zone is because of the unique relationship with Pioneer Park, being owned by the trust, but managed by the city. All of the parks properties we own, right? That's true. Never mind. Well, then, yeah, okay. I think we could probably leave this right now, and this will be one of our, like, let's go property by property and make sure.
Yeah, you can do the test fit and so forth, but I don't see any, at least initially, any downside
Yeah.
of leaving the term leased or managed in there. If there's nothing, there's nothing, but at
Mhm.
least gives you the flexibility.
We do manage some school district property, kind of, South
yeah.
Mercer. And so that won't get swept up
Yeah.
into the park zone. So I'll just need to think through that. Again, the parking lot, South Mercer Playfields, ownership. Yeah, yeah.
Commissioner Markson?
I just have a question about that, own, leased or manage, and I'm sure I'm just forgetting the whole discussion around it, but is there, so this implies to me that if someone donated land, that it couldn't be open space, and if we put this on parks, it couldn't be a park zone either. Is that, or sorry, donate's not the right word. I suppose, is there a situation where someone would still want
Oh.
to manage land but have it
Under their
zoned
ownership.
as a that in perpetuity or something?
But like an easement or something for those
Yeah,
purposes?
I don't know if I know exactly what the legal instrument would
Yeah.
be, but
Look at this. We've already tripped into our test fit discussion. One of the items for the parking lot is trail properties. And I'll just say trails. I wouldn't even say the word properties. Our trail system is unique I mean, like most cities, we own some of the properties. In some cases, we have easements. So we'll have to figure out that. I wonder if there's something we need to put in here. And we didn't put it in the open space lands, but around public access. Right? These zones were intended to be created for public to access the properties. Not intended to just be a conservation measure, right? I'm not sure if that's where you're going, Commissioner Markson.
to be honest, I'm not totally sure where I'm going either.
It's all right.
Can I ask the city manager a question about that one? Are you, Jesse, are you talking about, I mean, in the open space thing, there was language somewhere about even if there isn't access, that those, may be appropriate. Are you saying that that may not be the case with park zone properties? Is that what you're saying? I just
All
didn't
right.
understand.
I think Commissioner Markson and I were confusing each other. I apologize. No, what I was thinking about is if an owner, a community member here on the island owned an acre of land and they wanted to designate it under one of these zones just to conserve it, that probably wouldn't be allowed unless it was somehow also made available as part of operationally. We do have properties that will be zoned open space that aren't accessible right now. That's what I was thinking of, is this isn't a tool to conserve land. There are county programs to do that, and I'm not even sure that explanation was as clear as, I think I'm making it worse, not better. Yeah, maybe said differently, properties in the open space zone are, intended to be, they're held publicly for a public purpose, even if that purpose is conservation. The park zone was going to have additional allowances because we have active uses as well, but still held with the intent for a public purpose or a public benefit of some sort.
You might want to just, I think about that. I'm just trying to think about, would you want to say it has to have public access? I mean, you could have a situation
Yeah.
where you might say, well, initially it's not, it's not, can or won't,
Right.
but the longer term plan is that it would, kind of thing.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to kind of trip over ourselves. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on the designation requirements? Okay, now probably the more meatier topic is uses permitted. And I think maybe a good starting point on this would be, again, to go to our open space uses permitted. Because I suspect if you look at these, the majority, if not all of them, would probably be permitted in a park zone. So you can see there's there's the first, there's a 7, here we've got 9. But anyway, so we got trails, passive recreation uses. You probably want to use the word active, active and passive, active and passive recreational amenities. As we talked about, habitat restoration, temporary uses, which is I think would stay. And then wireless facility, probably there's probably some discussion and test fitting that would need there. And then again, you kind of the easement for utilities. Then there's also public art. I don't know if I saw, that was something that was carved out in the open space. Do any of those create an issue as to permissible or a subset of them?
And I'll remind everybody, we spent quite a bit of time on this, as we pivot to using the word active recreation in this zone, we'll have to go and define it. And it is absolutely acceptable for you to start throwing those ideas out now, because it definitely matters. Passive recreational uses, I'll just remind you, the definition is a low impact on the facilities used and include activities such as hiking, wildlife viewing, walking, jogging, or picnicking. Passive uses place minimal stress on a site's resources and are highly compatible with natural resource protection. So I think what the Chair Struck was just saying is our uses permitted will likely build on this. So I would assume that everything here is also allowed in the park zone, and then the exercise will be what gets added. If you'd like, we can start with brainstorming active uses. I think you also should talk about buildings and structures this evening, just to go ahead and pick on that one. I'll stop talking there and turn it back over to all of you.
So I have a
Okay,
question about that. What level of detail are we looking for? Because it seems like it's endless possibilities of what you could do in the park. So
I would say it's still early in the meeting. No rules from me. I think the more idea sharing, even if you feel like you're really in the weeds, that's okay, because we'll sort that out later. It's also an opportunity if one of you raises something and the others don't agree, it's an opportunity for an early discussion. If somebody suggests ice rinks, well, we probably need to talk about that, right? So I'd say no boundaries tonight. This is the fun meeting.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, before I forget some of these, so just an idea, I don't know whether this is good or bad. Instead of saying passive or active, you could just, if depending on how you define it, could just say recreational uses. That's just a small thing. Here's some things that were important to us on the open space zone. But for example, maybe we would decide that the time period for a temporary use in the park zone could be longer, for example, than in the open space zone. I don't know the answer to that, but that might be a difference. And the utility provision may decide that it ought to be broader than it was in the open space zone. Again, these are not things that you would normally expect to hear from me, but I think and then this all raises the issue, which I know you don't want to discuss today, of what do you do with a place like Island Crest Park? Because because you feel like, yeah, you ought to have the same thing on utilities for the open space part of Island Crest Park, and you ought to have temporary uses the same there. But I assume we're going to leave that issue for a later time. But I think there may be some tinkering with some of these things in addition to adding things, because the park zone is going to be less restrictive than the open space zone in some ways.
Thank you, Don.
I'll start.
Okay, Paul. Vice Chair Bernstein, please.
So I think we need to allow for permanent sports facilities. And we'll have to define what that facility looks like and what the limits are. But that could include things like grandstands, fencing, structures that contain equipment. Then beyond sports, there's picnic facilities. We talked about public art, allowing for that. When we go back to temporary uses, what are those temporary uses? I'm thinking about camps. How does a camp use a park zone? Permitting by the city, what type of events are allowed? Maintenance of park facilities. I'm thinking things like the pergola. And I know we're going to talk later about Luther Burbank and the buildings there, but I think there are two avenues on buildings. One is looking and maintaining existing buildings, as well as what would be permitted to construct a new building. And specifically, I'm thinking restrooms. How's that first start?
Excellent. Commissioner Marks.
How about parking and transit stops, which we carved out? Or were silent on, at least the last time. I'm sorry to jump in, Sarah.
That's okay. That was on my list too. Lights, concessions, maybe. Docks or like water-based features. I'm thinking like spray parks, which have come up sometimes. Docks and boat ramps. Or other water features I'm not thinking about. Like in the water features. Anyway, that's all I had right now.
Good, thank you. Don, did you have a kind of follow-up or thought?
No,
No.
I just didn't want to forget it because we spent a lot of time
Yeah, no.
dissing that in the open space zone.
Yeah, a couple that I had was impervious surface limitations, restrictions, or whatever needs, I think should be addressed. Public parking was, I think, already discussed. And then also on building and structures, an approach we used on the open space zone was to have kind of tier it by the size of the park relative to the structure, so that obviously, small parks, a few acres probably can't have a community and event center on it kind of thing. But Aubrey Davis or some other park perhaps could have a larger structure, including restrooms, so.
Maybe a different question. Are there things that should not be allowed? And they don't go on the list, but that might help us with our brainstorming here. There's lots of things that shouldn't be allowed, but I'm teasing some ideas out here.
Well, I have one that's near to some of our hearts, is golf courses. I think the community spoke about that about 30 years ago, but
So and the reason I wanted to invite this conversation is this is where we're gonna have to watch that our definitions and our regulations, like if the commission's recommendation to the planning commission and council is that we don't have the appropriate facilities for golf, we'll need to make sure as we work through this that becomes clear. So that's why I asked that question. And Sam is writing golf courses over there. What else?
Well, I have a comment on golf courses. The my feeling about golf courses was linked to open space, going back 30 years. I think as a practical point of view, you couldn't have one otherwise, right? Because there aren't enough big spaces. So I don't know whether conceptually a golf course ought to be eliminated from a park zone if the park zone were large enough. But I'm not a golfer, so I don't really care that much. But unless you put the golf course in Island Crest Park in the trail area.
Mini golf.
So going back to the discussions we had initially before we went to the open space and now this separately, some of the things we talked about were transit stops, wireless communication facilities. I think we had some pretty in-depth discussions about that, and I think we decided no to transit stops. And I would propose similar wording to what we did for the open space in regards to wireless cell facilities. So only as required by the other portion of the code.
Commissioner Markson again.
And just to clarify, I'm treating this like a brainstorming discussion. We're gonna go over this again, right? So, okay.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm wondering, I don't know which list it'll end up on, but animals or events related to animals like dog show. I don't know, 4-H. I know we don't really have that on Mercer Island, but who's to say if we would in the future?
Or horses.
My hopes of hosting a community farm have just been dashed, I think.
Well, I was gonna put it on the allowable list, but you never know.
All right.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Now that we brought up horses, I think we might have covered this before, but the property where the equestrian center is in Sunnybeam, is that private property or is that leased from a public holding?
It is a complicated property and I think part of it is owned by is it the trust for? I'll need
So
to get
yeah,
back to you.
I'd like to.
It's not
understand
owned by
that.
the city.
So, and then going back to permitted use or this might be jumping way ahead, but thinking about what happens if we reclaim an impervious surface. And what is the use of that? So I'm thinking everything from the milk barn on Luther Burbank, which I know will be a big touchy subject for some. That property, the equestrian center in Sunnybeam, if suddenly they vacate and we get that as parkland, where does it go and how is it used? There might be other situations where there's a patch of concrete that we can take out for whatever reason. And by the same token, there might be need to add concrete. And I know talking about open space before, we talked about if there is a safety reason, or if it's in the right of way, city has the ability to do whatever they need to do. But what if it's an area that isn't? And that could be related to parking. So if we need to lay down more concrete for parking to accommodate more users, how would we do that?
So one of the things for our development regulations discussion next time, we'll be needing to get into exactly what you're talking about, impervious surface, but probably even a step below that is how are we going to regulate parking? Are we going to do it by acreage, by amenity? I don't know. I don't actually have a suggestion. I'll be looking for all of your wisdom. Some of our parks with athletic fields, Island Crest Park, constantly overflowing parking lot. Some of our other parks, not so much, like the parking lot up at the top of Aubrey Davis Park. We have like 20 spots there. It's never full. So sorting out how I sense the commission will want to, we'll allow parking in our parks, but then we'll need to take it to the next level and determine how we establish those standards. And you're right, there are some things that we won't be able to regulate, like ADA parking. And I think what we'll need to talk about impervious surfaces as well. I think you're kind of tossing out the idea we've kicked around a lot is the no net new impervious surface concept, which works except for athletic fields when they're converted to turf. That's kind of the big challenge. So we can talk about impervious surface. So we'll put on the list for follow-up parking regs, impervious surface regs.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, one other one that we may want to consider not including as a permitted use, although I don't know how it squares with concessions, but commercial business uses probably need to be limited in some way. And I'm trying to distinguish a quote, a quote concession, wherever that may be. But I don't think, at least I don't think at the moment that I would favor the city, leasing some property for retail purposes, just generally speaking.
Does the city currently have any regulations about flying of drones on city property?
You all are hitting the hot topics tonight. I do not have the code up right now. I do not. Have we amended the code with the drone language? We have not.
Believe so. We rely on FAA regulation.
You probably didn't hear that, Commissioner Cohen. Ryan was mentioning that we rely on FAA regulations right now regarding drones. And we don't currently regulate them, but we may need to.
And when we talked about animals, I'm looking specifically the off leash or on leash, the dog park and so forth, I guess would get kind of wrapped up into that aspect.
Yeah, I don't want this comment to limit your discussion. One of the things we'll do is go back and cross-reference with our other code language. We have parks code, we have animal code, we have all sorts of things, but keep talking because I think you're getting all the ideas on the table. It'll help us for our next meeting. And I'm still trying to find the parks code. Anything else that I think the comment about commercial uses is good. We should frame that up and talk about that further. Thank you, Commissioner Cohen.
I think it's more general.
I think the comment was we don't want to prohibit things like concessions, but we don't want our park spaces used for commercial gain or private gain is often the way I refer to it.
And then another one which hits both of the whiteboards is biking, where biking is permitted and what types of bikes are permitted.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Reynolds?
I'm going to make a similar comment about biking and just say, I think a discussion of when and where motorized vehicles in general are allowed. Presumably, we don't want people four-wheeling through Luther Burbank Park, but on the other hand, they do need to be allowed in the parking areas, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And motorized bikes are part of that discussion, I think. But then I had a technical question for the city manager, which is, where does the border of the zone stop? Like, are we regulating only land area, or would the rules we write apply to docks and piers and swim platforms in the water as well?
Good question. The zoning goes with the land, not the ownership. I'm not sure if that's where your question was headed, but like Luther Burbank Park, for example, we don't own most of the shoreline. The city leases it from the Department of Natural Resources, but the zone would still apply to the entire property. And it often, the ownership then does typically extend out into the water at some point. But remember, shoreline regulations are a whole nother animal in our code. So for the purpose of the park zone, we would allow for water-based uses, but they're almost 100% regulated elsewhere in the shoreline management program of our code. Was that even remotely close to answering your question?
I think you're maybe talking around it a little bit, but yes, I think the only point I would make is presumably, and I don't want to speak for the rest of the commission, we would want to allow docks and piers and swim platforms and maybe even a slide on a swim platform if somebody wanted to put one in. Let's make sure we don't write anything that prohibits those uses unless that's the will of the commission.
That's right. And as we get to the next couple of meetings, I'll remind you too, the zone really speaks about the uses and the land. And then there's a whole nother chapter of code that regulates, detailed operations. And I'll help guide you through that. Again, I don't want my comments to limit you tonight. So things like you'll have to decide, are motorized bikes an allowed use? Yes, they get regulated elsewhere. They don't get regulated through your zoning code. So that's where you might recall all the circles we went around with the open space zone on the same things. Or I should say motorized vehicles, broaden that statement out a bit.
I had in my purpose, I had used the terms social gatherings and cultural activities. So I think of, at Luther Burbank, we have the stage down there and then social gatherings in general, but I suspect many of the social gatherings theoretically would be temporary use, kind of permitting kinds, larger ones. Clearly picnics and things like that is not an issue, but if you were going to have a big event of some type, it'd probably just be temporary in nature. But I guess but kind of thinking more of on the cultural side of, the Shakespeare and so forth, does that have to be a permitted use? Or would we want to be inclusive in that regard, just so there's no ambiguity on it?
One thing we'll do, maybe Raven or Sam can remind me, or Carson, to do this. I'm going to send out the link, one of us will, to the parks rules in the code. Next, in fact, and Councilmember Reynolds can remind me of this too, we have had on our list to update the park rules for a long time, and it keeps getting pushed down the road. I think once this zoning code work is done, I'm going to recommend to the council, we start working on the park rules update. It's chapter 9.30 of our zoning code, but I'm going to send it out. I'll encourage you to take a look at it because I think some of what I'm saying will make sense. And we can start really parking lotting the items that we'd like to see in that code. And I'm meeting with the council on Tuesday to go over the work plan. So I'm going to add this to the list of things we need to put into the next biennium. Somebody remind me to send that email.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, Don Cohen. What about in the park zone, what about things that are now in some of the public institution zones? Fire, public safety, city administration, et cetera. Maybe those are things that at least require some discussion, unless it's sort of a moot question.
So is your question to revisit what was zoned public institution?
Well, what if, I don't know, I don't follow all this closely enough, but I don't know where the police department is now. But if you wanted to put the police department in Mercerdale, or if East Side, fire and rescue wanted to do that, or you wanted to put City Hall in one of those. Are those things that we ought to be talking about or not in this particular forum? I don't know the answer, but I raised a question.
So just for context, what Commissioner Cohen is referring to is we do have a number of other zones in the city. The City Hall property, the front part where the building sits is zoned commercial office. The back part of the property where our maintenance facility sits is actually zoned residential, and we operate under conditional use permits. So there's a not consistency there. We have another zoning designation that's called public institution. that was developed some time ago this is my term. If the planning director was here, he'd smack me. It was a catch-all zone for these properties that didn't fit squarely elsewhere, like schools. And when I send out my zoning link, I'll throw that one in there. And if you look at it, the way that zone was developed, it's a specialized zone where each school property has its own regulations. That's not often how we do zoning. We want one standard approach to properties in a zone. But if you look at it, I think you'll understand why it was done like that. Some of the city properties sit under that umbrella, the fire station and town center. I actually think the fire station on the south end as well. Aubrey Davis Park is zoned public institution right now. So I'll send that out and you could do some light reading in between now and the November meeting. To your question of whether or not that's in the scope, Commissioner Cohen, I think it's always, if the commission has some feedback that they'd like to pass along to the council, I'd encourage you to put that in your parking lot. We can put it in the final memo, but the charge was not to rezone those properties, but you're always welcome as a board to share advice with the council.
Yeah, I wasn't advocating for including those. It just popped into my head and I thought I'd mention it.
It's a great comment. It's a checkerboard bit of zoning with all the public properties.
Commissioner Marks.
I'm wondering about like sound systems or video systems like they have at the high school football fields. I don't know what we have on our baseball diamonds. And then whatever you'd call the pea patches. I don't know, it's agriculture, but small agriculture.
So tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on technology, sound amplification, what things would be appropriate to allow and what things you'd recommend we not allow.
I'm guessing this will be a longer discussion, but I would probably advocate just off the top of my head that we would not have permanent sound and video systems at our parks. But there's a safety component to like recordings, so that's a whole different, yeah. I don't know if I have thought through it enough.
No, it's definitely germane. We have scoreboards, but there is a next level of like video displays.
So that begs a question. So if we had repeated vandalism within a park and it was very costly to the city and the decision was to put in surveillance cameras, does that fit into the park zone to allow that? Or is that public safety charter that allows them to do that?
Well, if you write your zoning code and you prohibit it through development regulations, we would not be able to do that. So I would probably ask you to adjust the bar to allow for things like that, but to prohibit, 50 by 100-foot video screens, because I don't think that's the sentiment.
And how about, I think this maybe is under commercial, but for example, advertising. And I'm thinking of Island Crest Park, right?
Yeah.
And is that something we should, I guess we de facto permit it now, but is that something for the future we should?
That might fit better in your park rules, but I do think there's a piece here around commercial uses that are not allowed. I mean, you can't run a business in our public park system unless you're running a recreation program, and we adhere to that rule right now, but I think there's a spot for it here. Well, if you're running out of steam, that's okay. We can conclude here. If you
Well,
have
I
a
was-
2 a.m. thought, email
Yeah.
us.
I was gonna, I looked at a couple of other cities and they, in terms of their kind of permitted uses, they had this big table and so forth. You've probably seen them, but then they kind of had not a disclaimer, but at the end saying, hey, basically, we can't think of everything at this point. So, if there's their future use that is, the regulation or code is silent on, we will, interpret it, appropriately at that time. So it's kind of get out of jail free card in the sense that we're not going to think of everything.
Absolutely.
I guess and maybe this is to think about, but I'm more interested a little bit on if there's any activities we should not permit. I mean, I threw out one, but if there's other things that kind of come up that should be black and white as saying, that I think the community should be able to kind of weigh in on that if that's appropriate too.
Question on the use is not allowed with golf. Would you say that's in general or golf courses?
Brian,
Oh, sorry.
Don can't hear you.
Thanks. Sorry, Commissioner Cohen.
I'm yelling at him for you, Commissioner Cohen.
I could hear him. Thank you, though.
Thank you. I was asking for a little bit of clarification on, we have golf written down as not an allowed use. We do currently offer some youth type activities around golf. So I'm curious if it's more specific to golf courses or that actual activity.
Yeah, I think it was golf courses as opposed to somebody going out and chipping or something like that, or.
And what about miniature golf?
I was thinking about that.
So my comments are along the same lines related to that some of these uses we're talking about are really probably more development standards and what we'd want to see in terms of a facility that you would perform that use in. So since we're brainstorming in the hopes of creating framework to go forward, do we want to strike some of these that are really related more to the structure, because we'll be talking about that later, like fire, police? I mean, that's an activity. Obviously, they can go into the parks and do their job, but I think that's related more to the structure. So again, with do we want to strike those now so that it doesn't complicate things in the drafting?
It's up to you. I knew this conversation would wade into development regulations. It's hard not to. We can tease this out, allowable uses, and bring that back. If there's some things you'd like to take off the list though and continue the conversation, it's the floor is yours. It's your meeting, however you'd like to proceed.
Any thoughts? Commissioner Hayes' suggestion?
I guess this is Don Cohen. I guess I'd let staff fiddle around with the thoughts that we've thrown out rather than starting to eliminate things unless we spend a lot of time talking about them. So.
Yeah, I would echo Commissioner Cohen. I think this is kind of a brainstorming session, and it'll be easier to throw stuff out as we go along, or say that, that it's got to go under this or that kind of thing. So.
I have one more.
Okay.
I'm really reaching here probably. Extraction of natural resources you wouldn't allow, like mining, wells. Well, I don't know about wells. That's actually a question.
You may not want to tie our hands on anything related to water based on our
Yeah.
recent history,
Yeah,
but
exactly. Fracking.
I know our code says something about mining. That's all right. We'll write it down.
Yeah, I think
let's
we
look at
actually
it.
say that in Pioneer Park. There's a sign that says you can't harvest, and my kids are like, should we not eat the berries? So there's a sign in every quadrant, I think.
What about some of those all those old maps, Jesse, that have the potential location for airport facilities?
Gosh, I think our code actually prohibits airports. You guys
Yeah,
are
but
really
am I
testing my
making
code
this up
knowledge
already?
tonight.
All right.
No, there are some old maps
Yeah.
of Mercer Island that have that from, pre-city.
Maybe something more realistic as a helicopter, landing
Oh.
pad.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is current city code about, I'll call it defacing natural or whatever. I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Snake Hill specifically. And then, if someone was to come into the park and start digging around, not necessarily extracting minerals or anything, but just trying to change the contour of the landscape.
Vandalism to park property that's in the
Yeah.
park code or the park rules. Or
I have our comprehensive plan, the current version pulled up. And this is another good homework assignment for Councilmember Reynolds and I, as we're working through that final comp plan. We did have a statement that identifies incompatible uses on Mercer Island. And it currently includes landfills, correctional facilities, zoos, and airports. Compatible uses then are defined broadly as education, recreation, open spaces, government, social service, and religious activities. So we have, I'll make sure as we're working through this, we're also looking at our comprehensive plan, which is being updated as we speak. So I guess my point then, just to be clear, we won't have to regulate some of these things out. They're already covered at a higher level. And I'll make sure we go seek and find those just so that you have that reference.
One that I was just thinking to bring out, so horseback riding. I know that, they're at the south end, in Pioneer Park, which is now open space. There is some allowances made for that, but how about in general, in the public or recreational parks? I mean, would that be considered just a recreational use? Or is that something that is not black and white?
I think we should write horses down somewhere on one of these lists. And this is something that you all should think about, because right now in your parks code, it says, I hate the way it's written, but it is unlawful for any owner or other person having control thereof to allow or permit any horse to enter or remain upon any public park property except upon bridle trails or other areas designated for horseback riding by the director. So you have a rule that says you can have horses in some areas. If you decide that properties under the park zone are not the places for horses, we could touch that in the zoning and then amend your park rules as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that's fair game for us to talk about. Maybe horses will be the conversation similar to art last time. We're gonna go running around. Do we allow horses in any areas of our parks besides the open space? No, just, yeah, all right. I didn't think so.
All right, last call. Okay, I think we'll call this a wrap then for this evening on this one.
All right, I will certainly invite any additional thoughts you have. I know sometimes after a meeting like this, an idea pops up, so please feel free to send that message to Ryan. And we will be back with some draft language. And we have a lot of things to follow up on here as well.
Okay, thank you everyone for that discussion.
Things popped into my head when you were saying that, City Manager. Other things from the past, bowling alleys and theaters. But maybe that's likely to be covered by the commercial activity discussion.
And or size of structure in a park. So yeah, a
Yeah.
couple places there.
I mean, there was a bowling alley at one time, right?
Chair?
Yep.
Yeah.
One more quick one for consideration would be fireworks displays. Fireworks
Oh.
displays, we know that individuals can't do it, but the city currently does it in the lake when they do it, I believe. But if for some reason they wanted to do it from land at some point, it would be nice to know whether they can or not.
Thank you. Pyro. Oh, boy. Yeah, that was Commissioner Collins.
I don't want them falling in the lake either, so, but that's,
All right.
that's a loser.
All right, we'll put a wrap on this, and as the city manager suggested, if you come up with other ideas on permitted uses or not permitted, send a note to Ryan. So now we're going to move to the fourth item of business tonight, which is absences and commissioner reports. Commissioners, do you have anything to report, including planned absences? Commissioner Cohen.
I sent a few photographs when we were back east in a Boston suburb, and I was very impressed by the trail system they had there, and not just the Minuteman Trail that's a more an older thing, but in the town of city or town of Lexington, they have a very well manicured in a positive sense trail system, a map and things like that. And it's the kind of thing I know all of us have talked about, the acquisition of property or rights to use property around here, and the area isn't that different. So I sent some photographs, I think, to the city manager and Ryan and maybe a few other people. And other than getting a cold there that then developed into something else, it was very interesting.
Thank you for that, Don. Any other? Oh, Councilmember Reynolds.
Just gonna note, I'm gonna be traveling for the next meeting and it'll be starting at 1 a.m. where I am, so I'm unlikely to dial in, but I might if I'm having some insomnia.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioners, may I have a motion to excuse Commissioners McCarthy and Westberg from tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Commissioner Hay moves. A second.
Seconded.
Commissioner Bernstein, Vice Chair. Okay,
I have a report.
so there have been
And one more report.
sorry. Oh, you have a report?
So
Oh.
yeah, I have a report, or rather an observation with the return to school. I've noticed a lot of the motorized bicycles on the roads and in the parks and on the trails. So I'm really happy to see that this is being investigated and how we might update our code. And I think it's really timely, and this will kind of tie into what we're doing with the park zone. And I know we talked about revising the parks code initially early next year, but now we're working on the park zone. So I just want to keep that on the back burner, that we make sure that our parks code is tying into what the city code is regarding these bikes. And I've seen some destruction in Mercerdale as well from these motorized bicycles. So I'm really eager to see that code come to fruition and protect our trails and parks, and most importantly, the people who are riding them, because they're at very high speeds. Yeah, thanks for looking into that.
If you'd like, I can just give you a quick update. Well, you saw the email that I sent to council. It was forwarded to all of you. This is moving quickly through staff. It's going to be heading to the council probably early part of first year, the early part of the first of the year. We will be adopting some version of new code language. It will be citywide, and we'll come back and talk to you all about the component that's related to parks. If I will tell you, there's some urgency around this code, so we may do the citywide and come back and do the parks piece later, because we just had an explosion of e-bikes on the island, literally over the last 4 months. It's just, and we seem to be the leader in the state. Other people are having, not surprising, having some issues, other cities and towns, but we are really having some big issues. So thank you for bringing that up. We're working on it.
Okay, thank you. So there is a motion regarding planned absences by Commissioner Hay and a second by Vice Chair Burstein. Commissioners, do you have any comments or discussion on this before we vote? Seeing none, please turn on your microphones, and will the city staff please conduct a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Cohen,
Aye.
Chair Struck,
Aye.
Commissioner Westberg, Commissioner Markson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Burstein,
Aye.
Commissioner McCarthy, Commissioner Hay.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. So finally, the next Parks and Recreation Commission meeting is a regular meeting scheduled for November 7th, 2024, starting at 5 p.m. The time is now 6:40 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned. However, as a reminder to commissioners, please stay seated until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast. Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening.